Okay, so let me introduce myself. I'm Jolene. I'm an agricultural economist by background from the University of Wisconsin. And I've become quite known as a practitioner in the land sector, but I also have a research background and have participated a lot in land impact evaluation and those types of things. And I think that's why Klaus asked me to be a chair on one of the research sessions that way. But anyway, I also worked for the U.S. Millennium Challenge Corporation for quite some time. And toward the end of my tenure there, in around 2010, there was a collaboration between the World Bank, the government of Japan, our government, and others to try to drive for principles of responsible agribusiness investment, with maybe some of you have heard of. So, so this topic is also particularly interesting. Maybe I haven't been involved in those discussions for maybe 5 years now, so it's a nice chance for me to also get an update. And so what we have today are 4 presentations that on the surface are quite different from one another, but I think that they tie together because they are all using different types of data and analyses to really inform a set of recommendations around how the scope for positive outcomes from large-scale land-based investment can increase. And so 2 of the paper that we're using geospatial data and quantitative data. One is legal analysis, and one is really looking at these international frameworks and trying to tease out how they should inform corporate governance, environment and social governance in India. So that's the kind of lay of the session, if you will. And we have 4 speakers. I will introduce them as they're ready to speak. And each of them will take 15 minutes or so to give their presentations. And then we'll have, say, a 5-minute round of kind of clarifying questions or key points you might want to make on those presentations before you forget them because you're so compelled by the next one. And then at the end, we'll have a robust discussion on any of the topics that we need, or you want to offer insights from your own works, etc. So our first speaker will be Kiran Tete. Did I say that right? Right. Okay, thank you. He's a research associate for the Center for Management in Agriculture at the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad in India, and he will be presenting on his work together with Pranab and some others to distill lessons for India and from India from trying to apply some of these global frameworks, whether it's from the Committee on World Food Security, the voluntary guidelines, the principle of responsible investment and such. So over to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kiran Thete. So this work is with 2 senior members, Ranjan Kumar Ghosh and Pranav Ranjan Chaudhary. And the one who is standing right now. So we both are here. Ranjan Kumar Ghosh could not join because of his other commitments. So the title is Embedding Land Risk Management in Corporate Governance, Lessons for and from India. Now, in this, what we'll do is, we'll start with understanding the land acquisition framework which we have in India, how it has evolved in last few years, and also try to collate it with the corporate governance which we have in reference to land and all that. And so firstly, if you look at the land acquisition framework, for the most part after post-independence period, it was governed by Land Acquisition Act of 1894, which had amendment in 1967, 1994, but mostly the act was very unilateral and authoritarian in its way, and the compensation amount was very low. Next, after lots of civil society movements, then pressure from international organizations like World Bank, it was the act was reformed, and there was this new act, the Right to Fair Compensation and Transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act, which was passed in 2013. Later, there were amendments, and an ordinance was passed in 2015. So the 2013 Act was, in this Act, what was tried was to rebalance between individual rights and the government authority. And the differences between this act, I'll show it in a table format. So if we look at the old act, 1894 act, it was that the monetary compensation was very low. The compensation amount was only 15 to 30% of the value. In the new act in 2013, the market value, the value for land was 2 times in urban areas and 4 times in rural areas. Then the act was amended in 2015, in which the compensation amount was saved. Two important elements which were inserted in that act was social impact assessment and environmental impact assessment. To give you an idea about social impact assessment, it was also considered that all the stakeholders should be consulted while land is acquired. So around 70 to 80% people's consent should be taken while acquiring land. Environmental impact assessment, there were some cases made that if the land is fertile, it has multi-cropping done, then the land should not be acquired. But there were some conditions put on for some public projects of national importance. This environmental impact assessment and social impact assessment won't be followed. So this act, if we see compared to the previous act, it is very inclusive in its approach. The policy documents are very clear. It gives the landowners an opportunity to seek proper compensation, resettlement, and rehabilitation. Now, if we see at the data regarding land, the area ownership is very low. The average per capita land holding in rural areas is only 0.512 hectares, which is like half a hectare. The landless population is 8.2%. The marginal land ownership is very high. It's like 3/4 of ownership in rural India is marginal, which is less than 1 hectare. And large land ownership is greater than 10 hectare is only 0.1%. So if we see the main issue was that the contemporary corporate governance largely views land as a government responsibility. It doesn't involve itself when it comes to whatever policy documents are around land acquisition to go and communicate with the stakeholders and participate in land acquisition process. Now, what this has done is, though we have a law which is very supportive of landowners, but there's a lot of gap between policy and practice. I'll show this image, which is from Land Conflict Watch database. Now, what this shows is that these are the ongoing land conflicts which are there in India. And if you see, all parts of the country is covered with it. Ongoing, whatever land conflicts which are reported are that it is around 780 conflicts which are ongoing, which is affecting around 9.4 million people. The land area is around 3.2 million hectares, which is affected, and the investment which is affected is close to $37 billion. Now, if you see the color, where different dots are there, the blue dot is for infrastructure. So land conflicts which are around infrastructure projects. Red is for industry, yellow is for power sector, green is for conservation and forestry, and brown is for land use related. So it's for all sectors, if you see, they are facing this problem. How do we see to it then? Then if we see that what happens is, if the whatever land acquisition policy has documented, if the corporates don't follow that policy, they land into conflict with it. It affects their assets, it affects their construction times, it affects their project flows and all that. So it's affecting them also. Therefore, it is imperative that land risk management is included in corporate governance policy. Therefore, we plan to have a synergy between whatever policies we have related to land acquisition and how it can be incorporated into corporate governance. So they have this land risk management facility, so they don't end up with projects which are stalled for a long time and face problems like for 20 years we are not able to start the project. Now, we know about the international frameworks which are given regarding corporate governance, what kind of investment should be there, how can responsible investment be ensured. In India, similarly, on various new policies have been taken for, especially regarding non-financial disclosure. SEBI, which is a regulatory body in India, securities regulatory body in India, It has come with BRR, which is Business Responsibility Report in 2012, which was later on conformed to BRSR score, Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report. Then we have BRSR core reporting. So the companies in India are required to have this reporting, which is like, and it is progressive in the sense. Now they said that the top 1,000 company by market capitalization would be required to give this, to show their business responsibility and sustainability report. In this report, they have various parameters in which they try to understand how companies, investors are operating, try to have an overview about is there ethical practice followed and all that. To just give an example, Principle 8 of NGRBC, which is Responsible Business Code, it has clear guidelines regarding how the social impact assessment, whether while land was acquired for investment, whether social impact assessment was done or not. Similarly, there are new codes which have come up, guidelines have come up regarding investment opportunities. If we look at contract farming in agriculture, over there also it is noted down that the sponsors, they shouldn't have chance regarding land grabbing, so they are prohibited from acquiring land ownership rights or having any permanent structure in land in agriculture. So there are these new guidelines which are coming up now. The when it comes to practice, because of the big governance structure which we have, the reporting is very less. For BRR, we said it was seen that only 26% of the companies complied to it. When it comes to, but gradually what is happening, because of these guidelines, there is imperative on the companies to follow these guidelines and have a clear idea about, if they don't follow this guideline, then that could affect their investment patterns. Then there would be cases against them. Even the landowners would have a larger opportunity to file cases and seek compensation from them. So in this study, what we do is, we have noted down 7-8 cases and try to understand how the corporate governance can be strengthened. There's one point which I missed from mentioning. I'll just go back to the slide. So in this case, I just want to give one case which happened in Kodaikanal in Tamil Nadu region. So in this case, what happened? Unilever Limited company came to India for a project. They got the permission to start the project. The project was like, the government gave them permission to open a glass factory, glass manufacturing factory. So they got all the permission documents done. Later on, after a decade, it was realized that they are not running a glass manufacturing company. They are having a thermometer plant over there. And this was realized when people started facing consequences of thermometer from thermometer plant. There was mercury leakages and all that. Many people lost life. It came to picture, and the case was filed against it. So what's happening is, one, why I want to highlight this case is because this shows that how the monitoring is, how much monitoring lacks in the country. Secondly, if there are standards in one country, Unilever Limited can operate in Europe, but it transfers its plant to India where there is weak corporate governance, and they want to take advantage of it. So it's important that we have standards which are same for all countries. So this type of investment won't take place in poor countries and all. So our plan is to come up with a policy strategy where we could club together whatever land acquisition policies we have and corporate governance strategy, and try to understand how to strengthen corporate governance in the country. So, like when it comes to policy recommendation, it's about like how to ensure corporates follow social and environmental policy. They stick to the sustainability commitments. The strategic investments on land, they follow land tenure with due diligence and ensure risk reduction, and they also stick to the corporate obligations which are mandated by Companies Act and different acts in the country. And when it comes to working with government, the plan is to create a knowledge database, increase digitization of land records, and most primarily to bridge the gap between policy and practice. Then there is very important role of civil society organizations, because they raise the issues, make it like they provide avenue for the landowners to secure their compensation and land rights. So as part of this project, what we are doing right now is this: our institution, Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and PlantStack has entered into a long-term partnership to enhance capacity of state and corporates in embedding land risk management.
Excellent. So, thank you. So we'll just have 5 minutes or so if people want to ask questions, to clarify anything that was said or to elaborate, and also if you want to offer some comments to Kiran. Take 5 minutes for that now.
I was wondering, you were mentioning communities. How are they involved in terms of monitoring and they are suffering from the city level case? So how is the partnership or how does collaboration affect us?
So
and FP, do they have the same?
So this social impact assessment, which we have. When it comes to social impact assessment, it's mandatory that if the land is acquired, 70 to 80% population should give consent. And in that, there are other parameters also seen that how it would affect food system or the other. So while acquiring land, there is a mechanism through which people's concern would be taken into consideration. Secondly, even after land is acquired, there is grievance redressal mechanism through which people can raise issues regarding land acquired if there has been improper.
Yes.
Yeah.
See, as per the present, this legal framework only during acquisition, communities, those who are landowner or those who are directly affected by the project, they have the role to play. But if you go to the BRSR framework, this it also allows communities to get affected in the supply chain. The communities who are getting affected during the course of operation. But right now, only the communities who are getting affected during the project, like the Greenfield project, Brownfield project, during the project starting, if you are affected, your voice is heard to some extent. As per the law, practice could differ. But once project starts, there is no such avenues. But BRSR is actually offering avenues for the communities to get involved at later stage.
So can I ask a follow-up question on that? Maybe you abandoned being the moderator, but so in India, there are tribal communities and forest communities, and I was wondering if they fit under things like UN DRIP or the voluntary guidelines for land or some of these other standards that are out there that where there's a hard requirement for free, prior, and informed consent. Because it's interesting that you put consent, but it doesn't talk about whether it has to be informed consent, which means something more in terms of making sure they understand the terms and whether it's a glass factory or something else, right?
I can.
Yeah, so now.
So the consent is mandatory, but the way it is implemented is problematic. But there is a very good example, a case study, Vedanta, which is the bauxite major in the world. They were not allowed to go for mining because 11 small villages lived by indigenous communities, they refused that will not give consent. So that was a very important case where the High Court Justice went there and heard the villagers. When the villagers told no, Vedanta was not allowed to. But that is only their case. So at many places the consent is manufactured, constructed.
So at least there's a precedent. Do other people have a comment? Yeah.
About the compensation, facilitating urban areas is 2 times the value, rural 4 times. It is in urban areas the value is that including the value of land and the value of property, the building on top of it.
The valuation include both. Yeah, but challenge is that why it's more because the valuation is as per the circle rate. So the rates are as per the transactional history. So in the rural areas, the transactions are not very much updated. So that's why the 4 times is not providing a better option. But in the urban areas, with these regular transactions, you have a historical values getting updated regularly. But it includes property. There is also option of scholarship where the emotional value you are getting higher. So right now, as per this act, the compensation pricing is very good. But most of the court cases, if you look at India, are around compensation. If people are paid better compensation, there could be a less resistance.
I see.
It feels like a lot of compensation, right? Twice the value. So is it not giving side effects that people suspecting some development start to invest?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question.
What happens here is that the land price in India is not very well updated in the government language. So the way land transacted is far higher than the price. The market price is far higher than the government price. But the value this company paid as per the government price. So that's why.
Okay. It's not the market price.
Oh, okay. Other comments or questions? No? Okay, so let me invite Christian Mesmer to come up to the computer. And Christian is a project manager at GIZ in Ethiopia with the responsibility for land governance projects and strategic change management. His work has been focused on on integrated land and water governance, which I want to congratulate you on because that needs to be done more often, right? And actually working from the grassroots level up to the policy levels with a whole array of stakeholders on various related topics. And today he's going to be sharing with us his work on use of remote sensing for monitoring the actual state of land use in these areas of large-scale investment in Ethiopia.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Let me first, I'm not the principal investigator of the study. So as mentioned, I'm the project manager. So I contracted the German Aerospace Agency, which then did this work. However, Ms. Eisfelder could not travel, so I'm taking over on her behalf. Yes. So, yeah, as mentioned, this case talks about Ethiopia and about responsible land investments in Ethiopia. So where we are coming from with the project, it's like from this phenomena of land grabbing, which is very prominent in Ethiopia. The green gold, some of you might have seen that movie even. So this is where the project originated. On the one hand, we need to have agriculture investors in terms of food security, but obviously they should not encroach smallholders' lands also. Yes. So the government of Ethiopia basically now is liberalizing the markets, various markets, telecommunication, and they are very much in favor of investments coming to Ethiopia. So this is mentioned in the 10 years development plan, but then also in the Ethiopian homegrown economy strategy. And we have seen cases in southwestern Ethiopia or western Ethiopia where basically land was grabbed for speculation purposes, loans were obtained from the banks, state-owned land was used as a collateral with the state-owned bank. So very weird, and then you had all these high-rise buildings and others. So this has to be prevented. And in Ethiopia, the major contributor to the GDP is basically the agricultural sector. However, the development of these huge, large-scale agricultural investment sites has been rather limited or slowly progressing. So basically, yeah, the next bullet point, they neither implement or comply with the contractual agreements, the lease agreements, yeah, or concession agreements with the government. And then what we've heard also from the case in India, there's very weak monitoring capacity that relates to various factors. Investment sites, they could be somewhere in the 6, so they are during the rainy season, they're simply not reachable, simply not accessible. There might be lack of funds, they cannot fuel their vehicles to go there and check physically. There might be, you might know the situation in Ethiopia, there might be violent clashes, so the government is also hesitant to go there. So what else to do other than looking from top or looking from a bird's eye perspective? So that remote sensing offers a tremendous potential in this regard for decision-making and performance monitoring of large agriculture investment sites. And this is why basically ZSI, that's the project name, Support the Responsible Agriculture Investment, has entered in this cooperation, or DLR received the grant agreement to execute, to develop a tool to monitor large-scale agriculture investments. by means of a classification, basically, and afterwards also training government counterparts, where there are only few in number, as it's like IT, and you need to have like very much literate people, digitally literate people. So there's only a handful available, and we encourage the government to employ more of those. So where we're looking, I mean, on the left-hand side, we see Ethiopia. One of our pilot regions is Amara, it's the highlands, basically. And then on the left-hand side, towards the west, you see the western lowlands, Benishangul Gumuz bordering to Sudan and Gambela bordering South Sudan. On the right-hand side, the blue polygons, they basically depict large-scale agriculture investment areas, licenses which have been, or like, yeah, contracts, licenses which have been given out by the government. So this is where we are focused. Yeah. So, so the objectives of the study is like to develop classification methods for cropland and crop type. So to see, yeah, what kind of cropland is there, where is the cropland, land use cover, and then also what kind of crop is actually there, if it's cropland, yes. And in this regard, we use then, or DLR, use open source high resolution Earth observation data, and on the one hand, and we contracted another entity to collect in situ data from the field. So, and the study, we looked at a time series analysis between 21 and 22 in those three areas. And then training, as mentioned, was given to various government staff. So this is the workflow. Basically, we have Sentinel-2 data. So if I'm not mistaken, this is, we talk about optical data here, and Sentinel-1 is radar data, or the other way around, I think. Okay, it doesn't matter, but they also with the digital elevation model was basically used. On the right-hand side, you see the field data, which is being collected to come up with here random forest classifier, land use cover change maps, and then also later on crop type map. Going to elaborate on that. So again, here we did these field surveys for 21 different crop types. You see them underneath according to the regions, what has been collected there. And on the right-hand side, we see again the sites where the data, according or by means of field protocol, basically, which was provided through the German Aerospace Center, field data was collected within the investment space of these three respective regions or boredas. So let me check here. So yes, then there was this using, here it is written actually, multispectral, so optical is Sentinel-2, and radar data is Sentinel-1. So this was combined together with the digital elevation model to generate this infrared picture. Basically, you see the red, the red areas is basically vegetation, and we are talking about 10-meter resolution. So from there, cropland was identified, like land use cover, and the cropland areas and the tree plantations. So you see here, there were 100 reference trees. This is how it was geo-referenced, as far as I understand. I'm not a remote sensing engineer or a technician, yes. But basically, whatever you see or whatever you see in yellow here is like cropland, yes. So, and then checking this with the in situ data collected in the field. This is now how the cropland is differentiated into these 21 crop types. We can nicely see the agricultural fields where we have wheat is red and maize, corn is basically in yellow. Up here in the north, basically, you can nicely see this even with the access roads, etc. Okay, so the following two slides, I have a little bit difficulties with this. This is very much a hardcore science somehow. Yeah, so basically they use 33, there's a paper basically, which was recently published in the remote peer-reviewed remote sensing journal. So I invite you to read through this paper if you are into remote sensing big time. But basically 33 different random forest classifiers were used to juggle around with the data. So, and then it was also tested for accuracy. So basically 80% of the data which was collected in situ was used to train the Google Earth engine, and 20% of the data was then used for accuracy measurements. So what we can see here, basically, now on top you have again Amara region, and below you have the western regions in Ethiopia. We can see that all, I mean, you see the black polygons basically, yes, and they're all kind of yellow, right? So there's agricultural activity happening on these large agricultural investment sites, where, for instance, here in Benishangul Gumuz, and even worse though, so in Gambela, where you have these investment areas here, the black polygons, and you see them in the forest. So this land is not being used actually.
How can you know that's not tree crops?
Because
Copper.
no, because like we checked these concession contracts, and they were for mung beans and stuff like that. So they are tree crops. Yes, it's supposed to be agriculture. So we can see here in Amara, for instance, the land is pretty much used for agricultural production. Yes, between 80 and 90%. Yeah, it's even mentioned here. However, in Gambela and Benishangul, we see the bars in the bar chart on the left-hand side, so which is telling us that this is not being used to its potential. So basically, essentially, the area of the land is blocked. Yes, or is not being used in a productive manner as intended to. And then again, then we can look into what I've shown beforehand to differentiate according to the crop type. We see that in Amara it's mostly maize. Benishangul is also maize, where it's also according to the agroclimatic conditions, obviously. And then in Gambela we have mung beans the most, which is grown there. So, but basically the key insight here, from where we want to take this further also, like now as a development partner, basically, is like that this land is not being used. Yes. On the one hand, I'm coming to that a little bit later. So yes, then the trainings were conducted for roughly 40 people. Yeah, on the principles of remote sensing, then this cloud processing in Google Earth Engine, so they don't need to have lots of computational operating power. They can use online or cloud processing software on these various land use and crop type classifications. No, and I'm hoping that they are not capable of doing this themselves somehow. Yeah, but like it needs a little bit further support from our end. This is a brief summary, simply.
You have 2 more minutes.
Okay. So that we use the Sentinel-2 data, Sentinel-1 radar data to come up with these classifications. This can be easily adapted to other geographical areas, and this is also what I would encourage you with a lot. It's out there. It's open source data. It has the parameters which are collected in situ, so they have to be adjusted, but then it can be used anywhere basically. And as mentioned already, we do not need large computational power and software, because this is done through cloud processing. Yes. So the potential application for this, basically, having this bird's eye perspective and these various classification, this classification is that we can, what I mentioned already, that we can identify non-compliance and implement thus corrective measures in the aftermath when it comes to the concession agreements or the lease agreements, that we can nicely identify crop planting distribution. So this is where I want to take this also further. It's like to use this as a basis for yield estimates, kind of to do market predictions, and even for the government to estimate agricultural revenue, which is being generated, which can be used already for planning purposes in the next fiscal year. Then also identification of suitable areas. We saw that land use and land cover change map. We can monitor obviously also the pests and crop health, etc. I made a reference to the access roads, so those can be optimized. And what we heard also from our colleague in India, potential risks can be assessed when it comes to the investment itself. So basically, the investors and the governments, they gain a comprehensive understanding of the operations in the field. It shall ideally lead to improved productivity if it's being followed up and to sustainability and informed decision making during this entire investment cycle. Yeah, and it's an ideal tool under conditions of scarce resources, as I mentioned, where there's, due to various factors, it's a rather cheap undertaking if you have the capacities to do so. The Google Earth Engine code was delivered to GIZ basically, and can be further utilized throughout Ethiopia also, but then also in other geographical settings, because it's also open source and only the site-specific data needs to be collected. And okay, we developed another software which is CAMIS, and this is also a little bit how I foresee this a little bit. So this is a commercial agricultural national information system, basically a cadastral database for agricultural investors, and this has to be somehow or another integrated. I don't know yet, but this is going to be. So this is it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was good. Yeah, so giving the floor to questions and comments for 5 minutes.
I have a lot of questions, but maybe we can talk after. I was wondering was.
Remember that I'm not a technician. Okay.
Yeah, I also need the contact of whoever the technician is.
Yeah.
But maybe you can tell me some of this large-scale agricultural investment area data. Where does that come from? Is it available for all of Ethiopia, or is it just certain parts of Ethiopia?
So there's also the land metrics. I don't know whether you know that. So they basically generate data, but this data shown here, since I work in these regions also with other activities, we have multiple activities in these regions. So we have contacts to the local investment authorities there, or investment bureau basically. And this is where we obtain the data. These shape files, yes.
Okay,
yes.
So cool. I was wondering if you have any indication of how these maps compare to other global data sets on cropland layers. So there's one that was developed by Matt Nitz's lab at University of Maryland, where they just do cropland extent and expansion. Did they look at how these compare at all?
No, but like I once had a call with them, I believe, with the University of Maryland in this regard. So no, this should be compared. You mean whether whatever they do compares with the maps we generated?
Yeah,
whether it's similar? Yes. No, I don't know. But like I think I had an exchange with some data. Yes, but can be done. Yes.
And then what about for
Should be
different crops? The accuracies for different crops. Do you have some crops that you do much better, or some land cover types that you do much better, or you know, which ones are good and which ones are bad? I guess.
Okay, so this is a little bit technical. I think it's about due to the reflectance somehow of the crops, right? The how the foliage looks like basically, and the chlorophyll kind of. So some, I think TEF was pretty good. The accuracy was 100%, for instance. So this seems to be the TEF is like the indigenous or the native crops.
I've never heard of accuracy of 100%.
But it was shown. No, it was like 95.
99.9.
Actually, I have to. Huh? 80, then it's 85 or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like it's pretty high.
High accuracy.
Okay.
Yes.
Just to kind of follow up also, like, so what was the percentage of the land that was kind of covered with that, like in what kind of cultures? Was that something that was not covered or difficult to classify or something? So I assume there was like 10 major crops or something that you took or 5 or a certain amount, right? And is there a percentage that was not classified?
In terms of crops, okay?
Yeah.
Actually, no. I mean, they checked. They even in some of the areas. So they were basically the same field protocols for all the 3 regions. And what was checked basically also from whatever the regional agriculture office told us what is being grown there. So according to that backdrop, kind of this in situ data collection happened. So it was based on the government because they should know kind of what crop is kind of being planted there, and then it was checked for these crops. And this the teams went to the actual fields, you know, and did this entire. Yeah, they looked around, they measured the field somehow, and then in very different growth stages in the juvenile stadium of the plant and in the more mature stadium of the plant. So that's what I can say. So, but it's like basically based on the government recommendation what is going there.
We'll take one more.
So, for instance, in Gambela, you see that in 2022 here they somehow collected even for mango. Yeah, I mean there are mango plantations there, but they have not done this in any other.
So we'll take one more question. Just remember, we will have almost an hour for general discussion. These are more like clarifying questions.
Thank you. Hi, Maya Schling from the Ethiopia. We've piloted similar initiatives in Latin America, and I'm interested more in the operational side of things. You know, what was the cost, especially of the field validation, for instance? I know that, you know, it's cost effective once you have collected all of this data, but I understand that sort of the initial investment in collecting all of the data and having it validated can be quite high. So I'd just be interested.
50,000 euros. 50,000 euros.
Okay, but in terms of like time and how many people had to be deployed to
that, I mean, I contracted them 50,000. I don't know. They got the job done. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No,
It's a good project manager to have.
Beyond my responsibilities. It's not my.
Okay, so we can come back to discuss the first two papers after we hear the other next two. So I want to invite our next speaker, which is Eduardo Villavicencio Pinto. Eduardo is a student at the University of Kent in the UK. His research is on the effects of tenure patterns on peasant livelihood strategies in the context of climate crises. And he has, in addition to being a PhD student, he does consulting work for the FAO, the International Land Coalition, and EFAD. So, have your presentation.
Thank you so much for being here. For research question on the presentation. Guys, try to understand how land concentration, fragmentation, challenge rural private property independent of climate change in Chile. So at the beginning, about the context of the rural development in Chile, and together will present four elements: a legal element, economic, social, and family, environment. In terms of legal system, which is the keystone of my research, the private, individual, absolute, and exclusive private property in Chile was introduced in the middle of the 80s by the dictator of Pinochet, like a response to the agrarian reform process led by the government of Salvador Allende and Eduardo Frei Montalvo. The idea was to support the agro-export procedure and also give a support to the improvement to the land markets in the rural areas. So the situation is not today. Chile has exactly the same land tenure system based in the idea of private, individual, absolute, and exclusive private property in rural areas. So one another characteristic very particular is that we don't have a different legal status for the rural zone. In terms of productivity, maybe you know that Chile is not very good representative of agro-export process in Latin America. Rate in terms of productivity and economic growth around 4% per year, and also in terms of reducing rural poverty from 40% in the 80s to around 9% in recent year. And finally, one of these new variables that we have to discuss is climate change, because at the same and another part of Latin America, climate change has been changed not only the quality of our land, just also the number of the agricultural land that we have to produce, and in particular with the problem of the small farmers. So the small farmer has to deal with this new scenario where climate change is reducing the number and quality of their land. So this is the context. So my interest here is to use two categories to analyze what could be the future for the rural development in Chile, considering the private property in the middle of this discussion. So to do that, I will use land concentration and land fragmentation. In terms of data from land concentration, I'm using agricultural census from 1955 until 2021, and land fragmentation, the data comes from government data. So the first thing is here in terms of land concentration. I would like to represent with this graph the historical process of land concentration in Chile as an initial picture. So if you see the red line represent the plots with more than 80 hectares, although this group of plots has decreased between 1956 until 1973 in order to the agrarian reform, addressing the agrarian reform, the reconcentration process is quite evident until 2021. And also in the opposite, if we see the red line, sorry, the blue lines represent the plots with less than 5 hectares. So the red line in 1965, the plots with more than 80 hectares control around 58% of the total of agrarian land in Chile, and in 2021 control 60%. So it's very similar. And in the case of the plot with less than 5 hectares, they in 1965 control around 55%, and today represent around 44.5% of land. So the situation in general terms is very similar between 1965 and with 2021. But using another metrics to analyze the land concentration is the Gini coefficient. In comparative terms, in Latin America, Chile is the second country with highest level of land concentration, using for these purposes agrarian census from 2021, 80.89%, followed by Venezuela and Colombia, and in the top we can find Paraguay. And another alternative or approach to analyze land concentration is put the focus in the top 1 of the largest land plots, and this 1% of the largest land plots. Here I'm using just agrarian census from 2007 comparing to 2021, and also only this 5 region was selected to this analysis. Why? Because these 5 regions represent more than 70% of the agricultural GDP for the country. So we are talking here the core of agricultural production for the country. And in each region, for the exception with the Maule, the portion of the control by this 1% of the top is increasing between one year to another, and highlighting the situation of the Biobío and Ñuble, where in 2021, 51% of the total of agricultural land is controlled by the 1% of the big land owners. Making a more focusing in this group of land owners, the average of this group of land owners, plots has been increasing in the same period using the same data. In Valparaíso, for instance, in 2007, they had around 370 in average of the average size of the land plots in this 1%, and in 2021 has 700, so it was just duplicated. And in terms of number of land plots, be a member of this of 1% is reducing. So finally, we have less number being a part of this group of 1%, but with more land control. So using these 3 metrics, the situation in terms of land concentration is quite evident. And in terms of land fragmentation, first of all, the idea is understand what is land fragmentation in Chile. This process was allowed by, in the middle of April, also in the middle of the process of capitalist modernization or neoliberalist public policies by the dictator, but allow to the rural landowners to fragment their land until half an hectare plots without any kind of government restriction or environmental assets. So if today you are an owner of rural land, you can subdivide or fragment your land until half an hectare plot. The legal procedure requires you that you have to maintain the land destination in terms of agricultural purposes. But in the real, this is not happening. This land is going to the real estate market because the people, probably the pandemic in 2022 increased the necessity of the people to go to live to the countryside, but maintaining their works or their jobs already in the urban area. So the situation here, based for the same group of the region in Chile, is that the 70% of those who fragment have less than 12 hectares. So in the case of Chile, when we are talking about fragmentation, we are talking about small farmers. And secondly, in particular here to this presentation, I will use Mudra region because it's one of the most rural regions in the country. Between 2018 and 2023, 34,000 hectares was fragmented. And here in the left side, each of red spot represent half an hectare plot, and the change is quite evident in the graph. So what is the problem here is that I mentioned now what proportion of this plot are developed in agricultural land, around 60%. So 60% of the land is going to the real estate market. That this is a very important risk in order to address the consequence and the new pressure provided or generated by climate change, because as I said at the beginning of my presentation, we, in terms of comparative level, Chile has a few number of agricultural land, and this land is going to the real estate market. In terms of conclusion, I can say that the concentration and fragmentation are occurring in the same place at the same moment, but the stakeholders around this phenomenon are different. When we are talking, it's little obviously, but not too much, because when we are talking about concentration, it's obviously we are discussing about the strategies of big landowners. But when we are talking about fragmentation, the data which I am using show that we are talking about small farmers. So the next question is why this group of people, who is crucial for the destiny of rural development in Chile, because they produce food for the consumer in the country, now the agro-export, are designed to fragment their land. I have three hypotheses in this line. The first one is that the economic result, the profits in their production, has not been good during the last 10 years. This is one thing. The second thing is that in the same period, the prices of land in Chile has been increasing a lot. And third point is that if they want to continue the production, they don't have people to continue in terms of family, because rural youth is going to urban areas. So these three hypotheses are connected with the idea of trying to explain what is going on and why they are designed to fragment. And in the middle, and in terms of concentration, the problem is quite different, because concentration reinforces the power relation, making changes or transition for the government more difficult. And also, finally, the fragmentation create or produce some question about small farmers. So the question for the government and for the state what we have to do with this growth in terms of land. And secondly, as I mentioned, the food insecurity, because it's the big number of portion of this land is going to the real estate market. So we are losing land in this sense. And finally, what is the concept which connects these two phenomena is private property. The basic notion of the private property, in order that should be individual, absolute, and exclusive, it's very difficult to think that with this same legal system, we will be able to face this new variable that we are living or facing in Chile. What are the climate change and fragmentation? Probably Chile was able to deal with land concentration, or to balance land concentration, economic growth, and poverty reduction. Our history shows that we did that. But the future, we have to deal with these two new variables, climate change and also fragmentation. So my perspective here, or my final opinion, is that we have an urgency to rediscuss not only the boundaries of private property, also the content of private property, in order to address or to get more option to the government, to the state, or the rest of the stakeholders to arrive to the cooperative form or planning new ways in the in Chilean rural areas. Thank you so much.
Okay, do we have any questions or comments for Eduardo? Again, around 5 minutes. Come back to a general discussion. Yes.
So I have this question. With land fragmentation, is there a new category of landowners which is coming? So you said two categories: small landowners and large landowners. Is a marginal landowners category coming? So in India, we have marginal farmers, small farmers, medium farmers, large farmers. So over here, you have only mentioned two categories: small and large farmers. This is first question. Second question is that you say that there is migration to urban areas. When you are discussing the hypothesis behind that fragmentation, how come it is not that the family is the land is being inherited by next generation, and because of that fragmentation is happening? Even if they are migrating, but they would have that ownership. They will migrate to urban area, but they would lease out land to other people. They will keep it uncultivated.
For the first question, is yes, we have another categories, but I prefer to use these two categories to show the extreme of the distribution. But in terms of fragmentation, I believe that this is an extremely new group of new land owners. It's quite new because this phenomenon began in the 80s because the government allowed to fragment their land. But the data show that with this level of fragmentation began around 5 years ago. So this is an absolutely new scenario, rural scenario for the country. And for the second question, this hypothesis, I'm using this hypothesis because in my fieldwork, many of the interviewed respond that the situation in the families is characterized by not for the fragmentation produced by the currency, it's produced by the decision of the landowner or the father in this case to fragment their land before he died. And it's a strategy decision. Why? Because the only one asset that the family, the small farmers in Chile has is the land. So they said, okay, if I fragment my land in 5 or 10 plots, I could get at least around $30,000 per plot. So with this amount of money, my child go to the university, go to the urban areas. So yes, in the future they will not have an accuracy. Yes, but this is not a problem. The problem is today I have to resolve this economic problem. So that is why I'm saying that this could be an hypothesis, but it's at the moment it's only an hypothesis.
Brenda?
Yeah, I have a question, Eduardo. So when you say that the land is going to real estate markets, what is the land used in? Is it only for land speculation, or are
No,
they?
it's for that. Sorry, thank you for the question. It's going to create houses for people who comes from urban areas, who wants to wants to live in countryside, but to maintain their jobs in urban areas. So the problem is that land with destiny to produce maize. Now we have houses, swimming pool, and everything.
Okay.
So that's this is my knowledge.
Is it allowed? Built on agricultural lands?
Yeah.
That's allowed, okay, no problem. Or is it tolerated? Officially not allowed, but accepted?
No, now this government is not tolerating this. It's trying to change it, the law, in order to increase the number of hectares at the minimum of the fragmentation, going to from half an hectare to 5 hectares. But in my opinion, this is not the completely solution for these purposes, for this problem, because the question could be why the small farmer has been designed to fragment their land. Because in the future, if you decide 5 hectares, some people with 6 hectares, the problem will be the same. So.
Thanks so much. I'm curious the kind of the challenge of how climate change might change these dynamics. So I'm curious if you could reflect on that a bit more. What do you see as the change that climate change is bringing to these processes of fragmentation and concentration?
Yeah. This is the difficult part of my PhD thesis.
Sorry.
No.
Professor was able to.
I said that if this so if you're the state in Chile and you have to deal with this problem, considering the climate change and the restriction that it represent, today you don't have any kind of tool to improve or to offer an alternative to cooperation or to make an incentive to facing this problem with small farmers or big landowners. Or I'm saying that the private property produce an idea that that the landowner can do everything that they want. So with any kind of government claim or government restriction. So that is why I'm saying that the Chile could show the very good history in terms of deal with land concentration, economic growth, reducing poverty, but this new scenario is adding new variables, fragmentation. So fragmentation is about private property, because in any discussion, we have to understand that this is not sustainable for the future. And secondly, we are losing our agricultural land for 2 purposes: for climate change and also for the land fragmentation. Thank you.
Thank you. So we can come back to more discussion. I'd like to now invite Brenda to come up, and Brenda Brito leads the land governance programming at Amazon in Brazil. It's an environmental organization. And she will be presenting an analysis of state and federal laws to look at how they are inadvertently incentivizing forest destruction, illegal land occupation, and even titling of those lands. And I'm just curious, I don't know if you can touch on this or if you're familiar, but there was an economist at the World Bank named Hans Binswanger who got famous really a long time ago. He published a paper on this topic, it's not analyzing 9 states, but it's sort of like, feels like a little bit of 100 years of solitude that why hasn't that fact of disincentives for them to law changed? I don't know if you've thought that or if you've read that paper, but it was one that I studied in graduate school. Okay, anyway, let's talk about that show.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So I'm coming from Amazon. It's an NGO based in Belém, in the north of Brazil. And this is part of different studies we have been doing over the last 10 years to understand to what extent land policy, land laws that apply to the Brazilian Amazon are actually compatible with the goals of reducing the deforestation and forest conservation. So a bit of the context, we estimated in previous studies that around 29% of the legal Amazon, which is the region we're talking about here, lacks land rights definition. And it means that this area is actually public land that may belong to the federal or to the state governments, but they have not decided on the allocation of the land. It's going to go to conservation, to indigenous communities, to private landowners, to issue land titles. We also know that around 57 million hectares within this area is basically undesignated public forests, meaning that the government has already mapped those areas and classified as public forests that lack designation. It doesn't mean that only this area is forest. Actually, there is more, but have not been identified as such so far. We also estimate, and that's a really rough estimate based on the available data, because honestly, even the government doesn't really know what's federal, what's state, but it's a rough estimate that 6% of this area belongs to state governments, and we have 9 different states, and 40% would belong to the federal government. And the thing here, and it is one of the reasons why we are doing this study, is because each state has their own land laws, and so they have their own requirements to decide how they will actually issue a land title or allocated land, which is different sometimes, many times, to the federal law. And we also know that 41% of the deforestation that happened in the Amazon between 2013 and 2021 were happening in these areas without land rights definition. And part of the reason why this is happening, we have so much deforestation concentrated there, is because we still have this process of land occupation going on, even though, which is a process that has been documented in over years, and unfortunately it's still happening, which is basically, you have this occupation of public lands by individuals who deforest land to signal and use, and then they apply and for a land title at state land agencies or federal land agencies. This is a process that's been going on over and over. And yeah. And so just to give you an idea, so this map shows what we call the legal Amazon. We have 9 states. And then the white areas are actually these areas that we understand are undesignated public lands. Or I would say that they may be undesignated, or maybe they already have an allocation, but this information is not available. But I would guess it's really a small part of that, because then we'll be talking about small titles. But yeah, so half of, I won't go into too much detail on the map, but just show you that half of the Amazon is in Brazil. It's formed by protected areas, including in orange indigenous land and in green conservation units. And this purple here is private lands. So we are in particular really looking at the white ones, which are the undesignated, and most of them is concentrated in this state here, which is Amazon states, and most of it's state lands. When deciding how to allocate these lands, we can, if we interpret our legislation, our constitution, we can actually establish an order of priority on how does the government, or how should the government decide when you have like competing interests. And the first priority is indigenous lands, according to our constitution, followed by quilombola territories, which is a type of traditional community, followed by areas occupied by other traditional communities, then creation of conservation areas, areas for forest conservation, areas for family farming, and in the end, like the last priority in the list would be private land title. So only if the area these private individuals are requesting are not overlapping to the other priority interests, and if they comply with the other legal requirements, then they would be entitled to, eligible to receive a land title. That's the ideal word.
Sorry to disturb, but what's the difference between indigenous land and private land? Can an indigenous person own land in the region?
So indigenous are recognized as a collective territory. So it is recognized as like a regional occupation. And here is really about private land titles where they can sell, but indigenous territory has a different logic here. It's really recognizing the whole territory where those communities use and have it here.
You cannot sell this.
You cannot sell, yeah. So they are legally, they belong to the government, to the federal government, but the indigenous communities have full rights over the use of the land, but they cannot be sold.
But there can be a case where an indigenous person left that community and has a private land.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if they are in urban area, I mean, yeah, but I mean, the indigenous land will continue.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so this is the ideal world, right? Where we have governments complying with their own laws, which is sometimes not the real, most of the time not the real. Yeah, but it's honest. We have still a very complicated political context in Brazil where, especially in National Congress, where basically they are attempting to change the order of priority and prioritize recognition of private land claims over indigenous or traditional communities. They have been presenting bills, voting bills, approving bills that are actually trying to restrict the recognition of collective land claims, including indigenous lands. On the other hand, the current federal government has restarted to recognize collective land rights, including indigenous lands, since last year. They have committed to zero deforestation, launched a new version of a plan to control deforestation that includes several measures regarding the adequate allocation of public land, including recognition of communities' rights and creation of protected areas. But we also have the role of state governments, and we most of the time kind of ignore, and we think everything's about federal, but as I said, they really have an importance in allocating public lands. And we identified that between 2017 and 2023, at least 7 states have changed or reviewed or reformed their land titling laws. In most of the cases, or all of the cases, without any public debate, or they basically approve whatever they want. And so this study here is really to understand what is going on, so that we are trying to understand to what extent this current federal and state land titling laws align with policies to curb deforestation and promote compliance with environmental laws. So we basically analyzed the land titling laws increase administrative relief in the United States and at federal level until 2021, and we did a bit of an update last year because there was a change in a federal decree and in one state law. And this analysis is not applicable to collective land rights. We are really looking at individuals who are occupying public land and then claiming a land title. So that's our focus here. In our results, we identified what we call 5 incentives for land grabbing and deforestation. I'll present 4 because of time constraints, and you understand why we are calling them incentives. The first one is that most of the land laws we analyzed, they allow new or recent individual occupation in public lands. And that's because there's no deadline to begin new occupation. So in some states, whoever is occupying land today can claim a land title after maybe 5 years or 1 year. So it happens in the state of like Amazonas, which is the biggest, or Acre. So this is a problem because we are basically saying with these laws that it's an open frontier. You can come and occupy the forest and you can claim a land title. Other laws actually have a deadline, but they are changed when there is a lobby, basically from those who are recently occupying. That happened with the federal law in 2017. So there was a deadline saying only those who occupied land until 2004 could be eligible to receive a land title. So they changed the law and extended 7 years. So now it's 2011. And the problem is, if I'm changing the law now, why can't I do it tomorrow, next year? And actually, there have been attempts to do that in the past 4 years. And here we add another box to the steps I was mentioning before, because I'm occupying, those people are occupying the forcing request the land title. And if the law is not allowing them to receive the land title, then they lobby Congress, legislative branch at the state level to change the law, and then they trigger another cycle of land application. So this is really a problem if we want policies to reduce deforestation. We are basically still keeping this frontier open. A second problem is that no legislation actually prohibits the titling of illegally deforested lands. So even if they are complying with a certain deadline of computation, if they keep deforesting the land, there is no prohibition that they will not, they will still get a land title. There are two partial exceptions that address maybe some cases, but not necessarily most of the illegal deforestation that is going on. And not only they don't prohibit illegal deforestation, but they don't even ask for like signing an agreement to say, okay, I commit to restore the illegal deforestation and now give you the land title. So most of the lands actually don't condition, don't make this condition to receiving the title. Some of them create like an obligation that they should comply with after receiving the title, otherwise they may lose the land. But even in this case, there's no monitoring. So there have been, for example, the federal audit court has been analyzing cases at the federal level. They found out cases of titles that were issued and then there was deforestation, but the government didn't do anything because they are not really monitoring to see who's complying with these obligations. And the fourth one is that, and for me, this is basically maybe the most important one. If this one was working, we could actually reduce a lot of potential damages, is that the agencies, and here specifically about state levels, they are really not guaranteeing those legal priorities for allocation. And basically because the land agencies that are dealing with the requests for land titling, they are not verifying whether there is an overlapping priority land claim. So when the land agency receive the request to issue land title, they don't go and check with the agency in charge of indigenous peoples if there is any requests overlapping, or they don't check with the environmental agency to see if that area has a priority for creating a conservation unit. And therefore, they basically are looking at whether or not this area has been already titled before, and if it's not, if they comply with the requirements, then they basically issue the land title. And what's worse for me is that the law even discloses information. So we don't know actually where these titles are from the state agencies. We do know from the federal agency, but not from the state agency. So they don't disclose the titles they issue. They don't disclose information about the titles they are about to issue. So that makes it difficult for civil society, for prosecutors, for audit courts to really know whether or not there has been any legal titling errors that should not have those type of application. So conclusions, we understand that support land titling programs in the Brazilian Amazon with the current laws, the way they are, could potentially lead to negative impacts in deforestation reduction goals because they may actually stimulate more occupation and illegal deforestation. So our logical conclusion should be let's reform our land laws. But the problem is, well, the political scenario, especially at the legislative branch, is really not favorable for land laws that are aiming to improve safeguards when they are actually trying to remove the safeguards. So we really have a difficult political scenario. So one alternative and recommendation to analyze is that the agencies actually should improve their practices and procedures to decrease administrative rulings that don't need to go through legislative branch. It's really like executive order, especially when we talk about consulting about priority land claims. It's the least they could do. It's basically having a decree saying, look, you need to consult with FUNAI, which is the agency in charge of indigenous lands, to know whether this land is actually being studied for recognizing indigenous land. I mean, if we already have a constitution that this is the priority land claim that you have to recognize, you don't need a law to say that the agency do that. You can have a decree. And also they should disclose information because we have a law to access to public information. They are not complying with it. And finally, we do have a good example from last year that the federal government reviewed a decree that was basically dealing with this consultation process within federal agency. The previous version of the decree, according to our assessments, had a problem. It was allowing allocation of public forests to individual titling, which is prohibited in our legislation, but the decree was kind of letting it happen. So we identified, for example, 8.5 million hectares of public forests that were being allocated for individual titling years ago. So they reviewed the decree and make sure that now it's explicitly said that they cannot allocate public forests to individual titling. So they can do some reforms with, looking at the decree level. Thank you very much.
So would anybody like to ask Brenda a question or offer a comment? Take around for 5 minutes and again, we'll open it to a broader, yeah.
Yeah, what you say about unknown, say, land rights restrictions, because there are different organizations involved, state, federal, indigenous lands. Would it not be a good option to integrate them all in a kind of, say, web-based portal where you could source from all the authorities on the rights, land rights, so that at least it's clear what is officially recognized. That's very
Yeah, I mean that's a logical solution. Never happened. I mean, I mean, honestly, this is one of the key parts of the problem. We have more than 22 agencies involved in. I mean, 22 agencies. Only looking at the Brazilian Amazon, there are about 22 agencies that can decide about public land allocation. None of them, most of them don't talk to each other. They don't share databases. That's a huge issue. And there has been attempts to have like a unified cadastre. That's the dream of everyone working with land tenure. Never happened. I mean, it's, but yeah, I mean, we should move to that direction, but it's really hard.
Somehow I was also trying to suggest that everybody keep his own role, somehow integrate, and indeed, use web-based services, use some kind of standardization, because okay, agencies want to keep their own role, because the agencies want to do that thing, but they should also realize that they're not doing it for themselves, they're doing it for the whole society. Sharing this information is therefore crucial. Not knowing where are the very weird.
I mean, I totally understand your shock, but yeah, it is. I mean, it's a so one initiative. Yeah.
Buying it again.
It happens.
Yeah, one initiative one attempt that it's, I would say it's a good example, even though there were several flaws. But anyway, but it's this attempt of having this committee that gets together with different agencies in charge of allocating land. So they have to decide about, okay, who has interest in a piece of land. If 3 agencies have interest, okay, let's try to agree, let's see who has the priority. So they have been doing it at federal level since 2013. But that's the problem that we identified. So the decree was actually allowing them to allocate forests to titling, because the way they were doing was that unless the agencies in charge of forests were presenting very specific demands, if they didn't present specific demands for allocation, then the default would be land titling. So most of the agencies were not presenting demands because politically it's still very sensitive to say, I want to create 10 million hectares of protected areas. So they were basically not saying that. And so we identified this 8.5 million hectares going to titling. So now the decree that they changed last year is saying Public forest allocation can be the following options: X, Y, Z. No public time, no individual titling. And now they have to decide what to do without allocating them to titling. So, but I mean, so even when there are initiatives that are interesting, such as this committee, we still have to look if they, I mean, the right incentives are there, like the right legislation is being complied.
This is a bit of a tangent, but given all of the context that you described, what is the role of the CAR, the Minister of Environmental Registries? Do you think it can play a role in mitigating some of these risks? Because I understand that they first deforest to claim the title, then they can inscribe to reforest essentially. So just like to get your
so CAR has been an issue because basically, so CAR is this environmental rural registry, which is self-declaratory. So anyone could go and send information, say, I'm occupying this piece of land, even if it's not true, even if it's overlapping with indigenous lands, even if it's overlapping with conservation lands. And that's the problem. We do have this registry with a lot of information, which is good because it's georeferenced, but it's full of overlaps, even between private claims. And the government has been taking more, up to now, I think less than 10% has been verified, because ideally, all the information has to be checked by the government. So, and since 2012, before, but let's say 12, when it started, less than 10% has been verified. So what's happening with CAR is that it's informally used as a land title, and in many cases it's kind of worsening conflicts, for example, on the ground, or allowing carbon projects based on CAR that are actually overlapping with community areas. So on one hand, we all use CAR. I use CAR because that's the information we have, so we use it as a proxy and a lot of things, but in reality, it has a lot of problems, and we need to be very careful when using that. So in our maps, for example, we don't use CAR. We use CAR only, so with the 29% of undesignated land, and then we see, okay, what's already being covered by CAR, so people who are actually claiming that, but we don't recognize it as private for this type of study, for example.
I'm curious whether any states you feel are actually doing a good job of sending a more clear incentive. Like your first incentive was really highlighting that there's this kind of moral hazard of updating the date of cutoffs, that there's no cutoff. Are any states actually sending a very clear signal that occupation will not lead to private title, or?
I mean, some of them, so the ones who have, for example, set the deadline for occupation. Some of them have done it recently, like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. When I see it, I say, okay, at least they have a deadline. It's better than not having it. The problem is when there is a change. The other problem is that they have different deadlines. So, for example, Pará states it's 2014, Roraima is 2017, Federal is 2011. I mean, so this is also messy, right? Because then you are sending again different messages. Roraima changed it from 2009 to 2017. So for me, the issue here at some end, I shouldn't have said that. There are 3 lawsuits at the Supreme Court questioning the change that happened in the federal law. For me, the hope is there. If the Supreme Court consider that it's unconstitutional, even though it's not the case they brought specifically for the dates, but if they consider that you cannot do that, then we could have an effect in other states. And I would rather see that type of solution than presenting a bill to change the Constitution. I don't know. I'm really afraid of anything involving change the law at this point. So for me, I still hope that maybe at some point the Supreme Court should say, okay, you cannot change that, because when you change that, you are actually affecting the protection of forests, for example. So that would be a way to go. But yeah, so the states, it varies. Some of them are improving land titling systems, which is good, but most of them are still very bad at transparency. And I think until they are not they need to be good at disclosing information, so then we can trust what's going on the ground.
So thank you, Brenda. Great presentation. Just referring to the question you were asking about, I cannot talk about Brazil specifically at the state level, but I work at FAO, the office, a lot of part of our we're very happy to see young minds, addressing these very complex issues. Those finances to that. So actually, with the cooperation, the Brazilian government did a study to analyze how advanced or not were the land registrations and cadastres in Latin America. And we identified that only one country has a complete up-to-date cadaster, which is Uruguay. So that's really the only country that's giving a good signal, at least in those terms. But it's in the case of Brazil, it's so difficult to talk about this interoperability and data infrastructure being shared when it's such a big country. It has 5,000 municipalities and so many institutions, as we mentioned, there are 22 institutions involved that have their own canister, their own information systems, and getting them to share this information is very political and requires political decision from the highest level possible. And that can can be problematic, especially because the lobby power these people have, regarding talking about people who are occupying land, deforesting to get land titles, is so big, because also they have economic lobby power. They have big markets, for instance, for cattle. They said they have very good buyers overseas that buy this meat, that buy the leather for very European, American also car industries that need that leather for instance, for their own industry. So they have economic, they have political lobby. So my question then will be to you, for instance, what's happening in Rio Grande do Sul right at the moment with this big floods, and that it's been identified that one of the reasons is the rollback that the state government made to many of its environmental and land planning laws in order to allow more development, and develop all these industries. Now seeing, the devastation, the destruction that this rollbacks of environmental and land use planning laws has provoked these circumstances now that are so people that are experiencing the same thing. Society, for instance, citizens can actually react or not and see that it's important, to follow, for instance, these recommendations you have mentioned in your study. Seeing, the direct impacts that climate change and bad land tenure and land use planning laws have done to their current situation. Just being a little bit philosophical, and hearing your opinion as Brazilian.
I have faith in humanity. That's a very philosophical. Sorry. No, just to give a sense of what we are facing now. Last week, with all the situation that is going on in the south of Brazil, I'm not sure if you are familiar, but it's horrible flood, and that is still going on right now. It didn't end. Last Wednesday, in the agenda of Congress, they were about to vote a bill to reduce protection of forest code. That's how crazy they are at this point. That's the scenario we have. And then after pressure, because people are saying, look what's going on, now they want to do that, and then the congressman that was in charge of that said he was sick and then he couldn't go, so the vote was suspended. But every week this is happening. Every week there is an attempt to vote, and they kind of are. This is the issue that we have right now, which is unfortunate that with the previous government, because it was anti-environmental government, it was kind of easier to mobilize civil society because it was clear that it was an anti-environmental government. It's different now because we are talking about Congress, and it's hard for people, I think, in general to, it's easier when it's the president to have this mobilization, because now we are saying, look, this congressman from X, Y, and Z state that people never heard of. It's complicated in terms of public mobilization. But yeah, I mean, it's happening. So the campaigns are going on. People are trying, but it's I think, yeah. I mean, let's see. I'm hoping that given the scale of what's happening in the south of Brazil, some people will really be more active in. But I'm not sure to what extent people understand the link. You know, it's hard. The link between, oh, I weakened this forest code, I allowed deforestation by the rivers. So it's not always clear, the link. So yeah, I mean, civil society will keep on going and hopefully.
What you said, that Brazil is a difficult country and a big country, therefore impossible to make a good
Difficult.
it's not acceptable.
Yeah.
And I think Indonesia, not totally comparable, but somehow comparable, making incredible progress in the last decade in setting up their land administration system and making it available to the citizens and same for the planning. So I think, from the outside, with the new government, it's hopeful, get together, and you need orchestration.
No, I agree.
Top down.
It should be like top priority. I agree completely.
Participation.
That's not always the case, but it should be.
Not just to clarify, I'm not saying it's impossible for everybody to respond. I'm sharing your dream too, Brenda, I'm just saying.
Yeah, but in terms of the cadastres, look, the laws, there are laws in which you say that they need to integrate some of the cadastres that already exist. There are pilot projects that have been funding going on. There are some experiences, but not yet scaled to the whole country. And I think it's really because at top authorities are really not taking this subject as serious as they should take, because it's really like at the heart of many of the issues that we have regarding poverty, regarding environmental issues. But yes, it does affect economic interests, especially from those who are in Congress, basically. The next issue.
Yes.
I think just to kind of follow up on that, we had a similar experience in Ukraine also, like with the Casper being probably one of the most corrupt institutions.
Yep.
And you could just see that by going to the parking lot. And I think what's important is to map the political economy of it, like how it will benefit, like, specifically, so that it's clear, because you can like emphasize on this, that, like, so, but there's really concrete people that benefit from that. So maybe that's what this civil society could actually do. I mean, it's sometimes could be dangerous also. There's always resistance.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think the Ukrainian diaspora, I mean, has improved a lot. Not saying it's perfect, but recent years.
Did you have a comment about that? No? Okay. Any other questions or comments now for any of the panelists? I do have a question for each of you. So maybe I'll ask a round of questions, and if you feel like answering them now, you can. Otherwise, you can take them forward with you as you continue, because I think most of the research is sort of ongoing. Maybe some of it's done. But for our first speaker, Karen, I was wondering, so the session is entitled How to Increase the Scope for Positive Outcomes. And we can interpret reducing risks and doing no harm as a positive, more of a positive outcome. But I was wondering if you're also looking at whether or not any of those international rules and their incorporation into environmental and social governance of these corporations could lead to more of a benefit sharing, and so doing greater good rather than so strictly doing no harm or doing less harm. That'd be one question for you. For Eduardo, I think it's a really interesting update and comparison of the snapshot between the two dates that you picked, and really interesting to see how sort of market forces over time versus shocks like COVID clearly driving, even in this country, driving people out of the cities and back into the country. So land use changes that come with that, climate crisis layering on top of it. But your solution or one of your proposed recommendations is to consider a cooperative model or collective model of land usage, right? I guess to say it that way. I was wondering if you're also looking back into the fairly robust literature on models of cooperative agriculture or land use that work and don't work, and sort of what are the ways to structure that model so that it does achieve what it set out to achieve, and also some of the literature on and success stories and challenges also in the European context on land consolidation. Some of the European countries had and probably still have the land fragmentation challenge, and maybe even, I think actually in the last land conference in 2019, I think there might have been a presentation on Ukraine actually on some of the same markets kind of driving concentration, but also fragmentation. So that's just something to think about. And then Christian, for you, I was wondering if in Ethiopia, and I don't know enough about Ethiopia to know whether the premise that I'm basing this on is correct or not, but in Tanzania, for example, in Mozambique, there's starting to be a trend of companies realizing that they acquired way more land than they actually can or need to use, and they're starting to do land return. Actually, in Nicaragua also, there's one example. And so I was wondering, were those areas that are not used for the agricultural purposes that the lease says, were they actually occupied and being used by others before? And if so, is there any consideration of land return? That's a thing that I thought you might want to think about. And for you, Brenda, I was wondering whether the big commitments related to carbon that all the governments are making, the G20 being presided by Brazil, and Brazil having this brand mobilization for climate, or whatever it's going to be called, coming out of the G20, does that create more like a new entry point where maybe if you got airtime to present your study, that the politicians would actually hear you in ways that apparently they didn't hear Hans Binwanger 30 years ago, so that maybe there's more of an appetite to actually reform laws. And I also really like your idea that you don't have to tackle the law. There are plenty of other decrees and procedural changes, right? But I'm just wondering whether those commitments are creating some kind of new entry point to get where we couldn't get before on land governance reforms. So, I don't know if you want to respond now or you just want to take those with you as you go to your list. That's those are things I would want to know. So yes, Bardo.
Definitely, I'm thinking in land consolidation because unfortunately the history of cooperativism in Chile is not.
Yes.
It didn't work in the initial experience about cooperativism in Chile began around the middle of 60s, corresponding the agrarian reform in 1967. But the result, it was not very good in terms of economic terms. But I think that the land consolidation model could be a good strategy, because if we consider that in Chile we have a very strong institutional structure defending and supporting the property rights.
Okay.
So anybody in the center south of Chile, in the region that I'm using, anybody is suffering a risk to lose their land for the violence or any kind of other issue. So in my perspective, we have to take in advantage this institutional condition, but also going to an idea that planning our future in terms of what we will do that with rural land. And one issue is, a few weeks ago, I went to Chile to do my field work, and I had some interview with small farmer and big landowners. I'm very happy with that because it's very, very difficult to get an interview with this group of people. And it was so surprised for me, in order that 90% of these people are able to rediscuss the situation of private property in Chile, but only in the scenario when we have a very clear technical condition, technical support to the discussion, and avoiding the ideology of politics surrounded by the private property. it's very difficult to distinct private property from the ideology, but they represent a very little, but finally an opportunity to rediscuss this issue, but seeing or trying to understand how in Europe land consolidation could be faced the problem of land fragmentation, for instance.
Thank you. Yes.
Related to land consolidation, I think the course in Europe was the inheritance, 10 children, 10 pieces. 10 children, 10 pieces.
Yes.
So, yes. So 2 kilometers long, 2 meters wide. Okay, and land consolidation. And it was successful. But what you said is okay, some farmer has a farm property, not that big. And okay, for other purpose, he's splitting it and selling it. And it will be then used for, say, second homes, living in cities. Okay, if you consider that not a good development, because you use agricultural land, then you could say, yeah, in the Netherlands, I couldn't even think that it's possible, because we have land areas that's totally not allowed to build homes outside the assigned areas. And sometimes, okay, there is discussion about changing plans, national level, provincial level, municipal level, and then after long debate, okay, change it. And then you may build there. Yeah, a farmer cannot sell to a citizen for building a nice home over there. It's totally illegal. It will be taken down immediately even before you construct it. So is planning also not a tool avoiding this?
And another thing is what
I mean, accommodate to some extent. If
To some extent, yeah.
is there a need in society for some people to live rural outside the city? And if some farmers want to have some money now because they need to have food or some for their children, accommodate it to a certain extent.
And let me say one thing.
Sure.
One day I went to a very rural zone in Chile called San Nicolas, and I had an interview with the mayor of the city. And he said me, during the last 4 years, we don't know how we can do with this amazing amount of half an hectare plots. They are in all of my municipalities. But they decide, and therefore they said me, but we understood that this will be our landscape, rural landscape in our future. So we have to deal with this new scenario. So what we will do is make an invitation for these people and say, okay, everybody with half an hectare plots, we from the municipality, we will offer an agrarian system working in half an hectare.
Great.
And that was so new for me because I start this discussion with the perception that the half an hectare plot is ever a risk for the rural development. But in this new scenario, probably it will be an option or opportunity because a portion around 40%, you have to remember, 40% of this plot it's happening in rural land without agricultural destiny. So it's land without any kind of purposes in terms of agricultural purposes. So this 40%, if you are able to, from the state, to offer an alternative, a production alternative, it's not a bad idea.
Do any of the three of you want to answer?
I want to respond to that, but like, a new question.
Yeah.
I mean, that as far as I know, and probably I didn't mention this, the lease contract or the concession contract, they obviously pay like paragraphs which read like basically we have to develop 30% of the land within a certain period of time. If you don't do so, then the lease agreement is being terminated by the government. But then, what I mentioned, and this is why this monitoring is so important, they simply have no resources to monitor. Because from the district or from their offices going to an agricultural field, it's like might be 70 kilometers and above there. They cannot afford it. So there should be ideally this land return happening on its own, but obviously these investors, they're not.
They are in some of the other countries.
Yes, but then it's again about incentives.
It's incentives, absolutely.
You know, and I wanted to say this also, I don't know the entire situation, but
Yeah.
incentives it's not only laws, this is only the stick.
Correct.
Yes, it is like also the carrot in front of the donkey and like harassing the donkey, like so. or voluntary action certification or whatever.
Analogy.
So and this is the thing, what doesn't work in Ethiopia is like they are very much in love with all their proclamations. But I'm sure, but there's actually they don't have any point if they cannot enforce their own regulations.
Yeah.
Then it's an exercise for the sheriff to catch us, and that's all about.
And then shining the light on
Yes.
the data is very good.
And this is also what I'm propagating for always. The only thing which makes the world go on is money, and even triggering certain human behavior. This is somehow the only
faith
thing
in
that works.
humanity.
Like disincentives or incentives, whatever you name it from whatever perspective you see it.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question about Ethiopia. You said you're talking about doing the work on the lists. And we're doing some work on Ethiopia's other countries. Risk reward models. Using very sick for go no decisions for land. To what extent in Ethiopia are there no land decisions? How much are these and kind of data that you're producing, or what I'm really interested about your hopes for the future that you're still trying to figure out. To what extent will the government utilize that data to make better responsible agricultural investments? Will that support?
Really good. So there are many vested interests, right? Yes, it's not also, I mean, political, the ethnicities, kind of tribes and whatnot. So they are supposed to use these things, yes. But then in terms of like, it goes also towards incentivizing responsible behavior from the government end, but also on the side of the investors, and the laws and all the guidelines and like the proclamations, the regulations, the directives which are being drawn up, they are not being. So this is what I can say. And then we develop lots of guidelines. They are all voluntary. Yes, we can rank investors. They get like raw status, silver status, gold status, whether or not as to what extent they give on such environmental commitments. As well, basically, it doesn't work.
My question then to you is the data that you're producing, who are you hoping is the user of that data?
So it's there are basically three users. Yes, one is the investment commission giving out the licenses. The other one is like it's the environment and climate change office. So they're in charge for all the social and environmental impact assessments before even investment license is granted. And last but not least, it's like it depends on the regions where you are, but the land on the region level, and then and similar on the level. Basically, they're the investment commission and the minister of agriculture.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Did you want to ask a question for Eduardo, and then maybe see if Brenda or Kiran want to say?
No, but we can exchange that. We also do land consolidation programs actually in Ethiopia, and like fragmentation is also a means of like to spread your risk as a farmer. I don't know how fragmented the land is, but like in Ethiopia we talk about 0.5 hectares, like they're called starvation plots, so they cannot survive basically these farmers. But then they're scattered all over the place. Yes, but so if one field suffers from a pest, the other one doesn't. So they have still some backup in terms of earning some livelihood. Also then against the backdrop of climate change, depending on the flow and soil conditions, etc. So that we can further exchange them.
Kiran?
respond to your question by saying that we don't have a choice, but it's important for us to comply with the international standards. So there are not loopholes there, somebody can exploit in Sudan.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say that, so in terms of, maybe this hasn't started reaching companies in Ethiopia yet, 'cause it's industry specific, but in, for example, in the palm sector, it's really interesting. In Colombia, the palm sector has a terrible reputation for land grabbing and not respecting rights, but now they're really trying to change that, not because it's just plain goodwill, but because their market is demanding. Like, they can't get a certification without knowing that the small farmers have their rights protected, right? So it's, the market dynamics, that's why I asked the question I asked you, so I don't know if you want to touch on that or.
Yeah, so very quickly, I guess at the federal level, even before G20 and even last year, they were already responding, as the example of changing the decree that came partly of conversations with civil society. We presented our work, others presented, so they understood there was a problem, and they drafted the decree and finally they enacted. At state level, though, it's a completely different story. I mean, the state governors are really attached to rural interests, voters, campaign donations, etc. It's really hard to make them. I mean, even if it's difficult, even if the part I mentioned about like disclosure information,
right?
That's a huge fight. They say it's not public information, it's private information, because if I issue a land title, it's private information. I cannot give you this information. It's public, but whenever we request the state agencies, some of them say, no, I cannot give you this information because that is private.
That's true in several Latin America.
That's the type of, even though we have a law of access of public information, I mean, basically it's you need to disclose information. Who is receiving the land title? Where is it? Yeah. So I mean that's.
But don't all this, the federal government doesn't have any ability to say like our country has to reduce carbon or have carbon.
I mean they know when we talk about land policies. I mean the federal government really has some limitations
because it's a state.
Unless it's indigenous lands, then it's really about federal government.
Mostly it's a state.
But they are trying. There has been attempts in the past to have more like coherence among the different policies. So they are trying again to reopen dialogue with state governments. Many of them are saying yes, let's do it. I mean there is some interest, but to what extent they will really understand that they cannot be issuing land titles to recently deported lands, that's a different story.
And whether the enforcement is strong enough, as you said, to balance the vested interest.
Yeah, what I usually say is that if you ask the presidents and the governors, all of them will say, yes, we need to apply land laws. We need to do that. But what they understand by land titles, land laws, land regulations are completely different. Monster. Each of them will have a different concept. That's the issue.
So anyway, we have to wrap up, but thank you all speakers for really good presentations and interesting discussion. And thanks for the audience too. So.